Good.
Hey, shalom, guys. Many blessings to you all. Me and James, we're back at it. We're so happy to be back here. Um, Many blessings to you guys. We wanted to see if we got together today and finish. It's the third part, James. Third part.
Yeah, this is third one.
This is the third part of our Soul series. And we wanted to see if we cap it off with like a recap of what we've done in the last two segments and also get into a very heavy, mystical, deep concept called Ibur, the impregnation of the soul. And I know that you have, James, you've written a lot on this topic, and we've gone back and forth behind the scenes on this. This is one of the most amazing and deep concepts that the Torah
Yeah.
has. And we know from our studies that this is also something found in the ancient writings of the apostles of Rabbi Yeshua of Nazareth.
Yeah.
It's in there. We know it's in there. We've seen it. We're getting ready to share many of these sources and teachings to see how they connect. How you doing, man?
Good, man. It's been a while since we did this. We start off strong, we have our concepts, and then I think life just comes in, or we find new topics. I think I think every day we talk, share some kind of
Yeah,
content. So it's really challenging to stay on point. I give people credit who do. But we're here, we're going to do this. We're going to get through this third one. This could very easily be a 10-part series, but we'll try to do our best to make it palatable and accessible. And yeah, like you said, right? We started off, we did Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama. We talked about the levels of the soul that are kind of part of our everyday reality, the existence, like the kind of balance that we strike between those three levels. We kind of compared and contrast versus kind of the way the world looks at the soul in general. We tend to think there's the soul and it's kind of like this spirit, ethereal thing, and then there's the body. And then, the cartoons we grew up with, the body passes away and the spirit comes out and it's like a ghost. And the word
yeah,
spirit and soul kind of just interchangeable. They mean the same thing. And it's not the case
right.
at all in the Torah. As we said many times in this series, there are five parts. The sages recognize that there are five parts of the soul, and each one has its own complex set of issues and its own complex um, perspective. And yeah, so if you're tuning in and you haven't watched those other ones, go back to the YouTube page, Rethinking Faith, and you can find those episodes. They should be the last three. I don't think we've done any since then. You
Yeah,
can also go to my website, thehiddenorchard.com. There's a lot on these as well. I've kind of taken a bunch of our notes and put them into a series and even expanding beyond what we covered here. So yeah,
yeah,
let's do this.
definitely.
Let's jump in. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah. Let's jump in. Let's jump in. I wanted to say that. I mean, we get a lot of feedback, and I know this is the topic that a lot of folks like, and it should be so because the topic of the soul is something that's vital. I mean,
Yeah.
we all have a soul, and it's important to understand why we are here, what we're supposed to be doing, how to do it, and all these different details we can only know by studying the Torah and knowing God's word in depth.
Yeah.
And so, let's get right into it, man. I'm excited.
Yeah, and you just made a really good point already. Um, this comes from the Jewish oral tradition.
Hmm.
So it would be really challenging for someone to open up the Torah for the first time and go through and find these in plain writing with explanation. And
Yeah.
there is a lot in the Torah that people accept. Even the New Testament, people just accept heaven and hell, or some form of these concepts, afterlife, angels, demons, spirits, right? Neither the New Testament nor the Torah, and by that I mean like the prophets and the writings as well, none of them explain these concepts. They assume that we understand these concepts. So as we're reading this, know that this comes from the Jewish oral tradition, oral Torah, also called the Masorah. So for anyone out there who's going to say, well, where is this in writing? Well, that's the trick. All of this stuff is in that oral tradition. The Torah could never contain the explicit instructions for all of these. So that's kind of where we're
That's
starting.
Great. That's such a great point to start off, James. And like you said, a lot of people be like, well, can you show me where that's at in the Bible? And it's beautiful because the rabbis actually do point to, each verse where each level of the soul is to be found. I mean, they do. We don't have enough time to be able to take everyone where each of the passages, but it's there. We could definitely share this in like in a comment section or something like that. But the rabbis, any point that they make, they always point to a pasuk, to a verse in the
Yep.
Torah, in the Tanakh, and then they explain the oral tradition behind those passages on each different level of the pardes. So let's get into it, man.
Yeah, and that's right. So we're entering into Sod territory. We're entering into the mystical level interpretation of the Torah. All right, so the word Ibur, we've said this a couple times now. Ibur means impregnation. It's the kind of language that something has been put into place that will grow into something beautiful. It'll become something more. But the language is very much the same as if a woman were pregnant, right? It's the same language, but it's this kind of pregnant with potential, as you could say, in
Yeah.
another way of looking at it. Ibor it's part of the complex world of Jewish reincarnation, not to be mistaken for other forms of reincarnation. In the Hebrew, it's called Gilgul or Gilgalim. And in fact, a lot of the writings that we're going to look at tonight, the content is coming from a book called The Gates of Reincarnation, which is in Hebrew, Sha'ar HaGilgulim, by Rabbi Isaac Luria, also known as the Arizal. He's the only person I know of that has taken the time to really explain these in technical, complex, almost scientific, and like a textbook form. But nevertheless, when you think reincarnation, if you're already having a hard time with that, think of levirate marriage in the Torah. There's no physical way to explain what levirate marriage does without understanding that some kind of a transmigration of the soul is happening there. There's some
Yep.
degree of transfer of somebody's soul into that child. And I think I'll say this up front, I think we've been kind of hardwired and conditioned not to think about that, especially when it comes to um, uh, you know, intimate relationships. We've been kind of hardwired not to think about the soul level transactions, right? We've been kind of taught that these don't really matter. Well, they do matter in a big way, and the Torah explains this over and over. But um, nevertheless, just understand that levirate marriage comes out of this same pool of reincarnation and incarnate talk of the soul so far. What do you think?
This no, definitely. This is a topic that's very difficult, and I've heard rabbis say that the topic of the reincarnation, according to Torah, is probably one of the most complex, if not the most complex topic in Torah. One of the most complex topics in Torah, very difficult to understand.
Yeah,
Um, there's a lot of misunderstanding, and I've heard people say, well, you come back as an animal, and you come back as, and these things are they're being viewed at such an elementary level that it's hard to grasp. Um, with Gilgul just saying right off the back, from my understanding of what I've read, the rabbis explained that it's not that I actually come back and come back and come back again,
right.
but it's the way it's understood. Rav Ginsburg, I have a book here by one of his disciples, Rabbi Trugman. It's explained in a way that can be understood very easily.
Yeah,
So I'm a father, all right, and my wife, we're connected. We connect. Here's actual, like you were just talking about, when two couples come together, those souls intermingle. Okay, there's an intermingling of souls, and
yep,
her soul will go into mine, and my soul will go into her. Okay,
yep.
when that's why sex and coming together is so sacred according to Torah, right?
Yeah, and
Um,
that's why
there's a
this
lot of laws that go
language.
into it.
Yeah, and just to kind of add while you're on this, because I know you're moving through it, that's why the language it's colored with that type of language. It's an impregnation, ibor, right?
Yes,
There's a very
yes,
deep intimacy to it. Go ahead.
yes. No, no, that's a great point. Great point. I wanted to say that. So when you come together and you have children, right? there are soul sparks or souls, parts of souls of each parent that go
Mhm.
into the child. In a sense, this is like a Gilgul. This is like a reincarnation. And
Yeah.
what could happen in the child is these different characteristic traits, midos of parents get into the child. So one child can have more of the mother or more of the father, or some characteristic traits are more dormant. Or have you ever heard? I know you've heard this many times, James. When I was young, I used to hear it all the time. It'd be like the mom would be like, "You act just like your father," or or you act
Mhm.
just like my great grandfather, or something like that, because it could be passed not just through parents, but it can go back in the ancestors.
Well, that's what the basis of Israel is about. There's some connection to the patriarchs, to the Avot. And
Yep.
that's why all Israel will be saved, as Paul says, as right. So there's an amazing story in the Talmud. I'll do this quickly. Um, Rabban Gamliel gets kind of into a discussion with Rabbi Yehoshua, and they're looking for somebody who can kind of take Rabban Gamliel's place. And the person they wanted to put in was a convert, or his parents were a convert, and they said he wouldn't. And this is in the Talmud. He doesn't have the soul level protection that the patriarchs have. He's a Jew, but he doesn't have that soul level connection. And they said it wouldn't be a good idea for him to become the leader because basically there's going to be a lot on him. So the essence of like the Jewish people in Israel, it's all because of the same. It's technically, when you think about it, it's the concept of Ibur. The
Yep.
patriarchs are coming down through, and this is the same for everybody. I mean, everyone has um, elements of their ancestors' souls in them. It's just it's a dimension we don't think about. Of course, we have their DNA. We're okay with that. We're okay to accept the physical, but the spiritual really ruffles some people's feathers a little bit, I
Of
think.
course, of course. So then the child, he has these, and this is how it is explained. It's how I've understood it. So myself, I am already working through previous Gilgulim reincarnations, right? And rectifying the soul levels of the past person or past persons is up to the person who has been incarnated now. For example, myself, Ray Lu, I have a
Yeah,
job to do, and there's certain things that I was just born with, certain
yeah,
strengths and certain weaknesses. How did that happen? I didn't want them. It was the way it is. So my mission in life is to correct this. If somehow, some way I don't correct it and I pass on, it could be that I passed on that same trait to my son, and it is
yeah,
up to him in the next Gilgul, next reincarnation, to try to rectify this situation
yeah.
that's going on each of the levels of the soul. That's in the easiest way that we can explain it, in ways that people can understand. It's all there. It's all in the DNA. All the soul sparks are there. And so, I
Yeah.
mean, this stuff is fascinating, incredible.
It gets so deep so quick. I mean, we're not even on to the main part, but you bring up the point of that's our tikkun. That's what our life is about. So we've been put into this world. Um, some would say I didn't choose it. Some would say you did choose it, right? Part of you
Yep,
chose it.
yep, yep.
The
You don't
family,
remember. You don't remember the contract.
right? Exactly. So there's this world. You have your particular proclivities. You have your preferences, the things you like to eat, the things you don't. All of that is part of the tikkun, and you may have multiple, right?
Yep,
It
yep,
may be to stop multi-generational adultery or alcoholism or
yep,
whatever. It may be up
yep.
to you, and you can put that down and follow in the footsteps of your fathers and mothers, or you can hurdle it and move into the next mission. And this is where Ibur becomes important because um, consider it like this: the Ibur is when a soul, some soul level of a person, either on Earth who has the capability, but often it's usually considered to be somebody who has passed away, like a
Passed
child.
on.
Yeah, it's like a conditional um, entanglement with their soul. And
Yep,
as if this is why it's important to watch the other episodes that we did of this, the nefesh, the ruach, neshama. While we've kind of simplified them into three of the five levels, each of them have little sub levels in them, right? Each of them, it's like tiny, tiny little sparks that make up those things. Now, a spark from that righteous person's soul can kind of move, like picture your soul as like a computer board with a whole bunch of slots, a whole bunch of open slots in it. It actually kind of comes in and it helps you with some task or some um
The
uh,
download.
yeah, it's like some software upgrade, and their soul's entangled with your soul for a time, and it helps you grow and develop in a way you probably couldn't, or it would have taken you a lot longer to do that. And the sages talk about this in a way that if you are genuinely trying to work on yourself, I'm in, Hashem, I'm going to do this. I'm going to start reading the Torah. I'm going to do my best to, be Shomer Shabbos or whatever that looks like. I'm going to light a candle,
Right,
two candles,
right,
whatever. Um, as long as it's coming from a place of the heart, Hashem will kind of enable this Ibur. And man, and this is what the Arizal says. Another well-known concept in the world of our rabbis can be understood that the Ruach and the Neshama of righteous people can come and impregnate, there's the word Ibur, a person in secret, which is called Ibur, to assist him in the service of God, as it says, and he gives some sources here, and he quotes Talmud Shabbat. And of course, this is from the Arizal's writing, um, captured in Sha'ar HaGogolim. That's how it works. You consign yourself to this mission. I'm going to do the best I can, and someone will help you. Tzaddik. It could be really anyone. There are lots of people who could assist in this way. Um, what do you think
two
about that?
things two things that I wanted to say. One, about the impregnation of the soul. So when a person has an Ibur, right, just like a woman who has a child, the child does not take over the body or the person of the
Yeah,
mother. Like she's still her, but she has another soul in her. Okay,
yeah,
she could feel his feelings, everything. She we have heard mothers say the baby's sad or the baby doesn't feel well. How does she feel all that? It's a soul concept. It's all has to do with the soul. Now, now, when speaking about the Ibor in a spiritual manner, when a person is impregnated by the soul does not take over the person,
right.
but can help him and give him like clarity, a type of clarity that he may not have had before that.
Yep.
But you're still you. You're still you. And according to the Arizal, the individual at the end, let's say he finished his tikkun, the individual gets the in whole reward and the
Yeah.
tzaddik gets the whole reward. It's not like partial. The tzaddik helped you. He might have done a lot of the work to help you get clarity, but you
Yep.
still get the reward, and so does the tzaddik.
Yep.
The number two thing that I'm going to say that is very important to what you were saying now, James, so they could give people some type of direction, understanding like, okay, why does an Ibor happen? How does it happen?
Yeah.
What past soul comes to do it? I mean, there's so many questions that need to be answered.
No,
So
yeah.
it's like this. Every soul, you yourself, James, me, we have a soul root,
Yep.
okay? And the soul root, there are a cluster of souls that are all connected to that soul root,
Yep.
and so on and so forth. There are other soul root souls that have other soul roots and they're connected. And so this is why our children are born our children. They're
Yeah.
part of our soul root and our ancestors. The same thing. That ancestors is part of the cluster of that soul root. Now, this is
Yep.
the amazing thing. This is where it gets really deep. So, like, there could be a tzaddik who's part of our soul root, but it has to be, I think it has to be somebody that we might have some connection with, especially if we're
Sure.
talking about evil, because we're talking about the impregnation of a righteous soul.
Yeah.
We're not talking about a debu, which is something else.
Kind of the opposite, but we'll come back to that.
Okay. So then what happens is these soul clusters, they share the soul root. But now the amazing thing is that there's certain tzaddikim that may have connections to different soul clusters because they're not just a normal soul. For example, Moses or the Messiah, even more so, Adam Harishon, they were a soul called uh, a neshama klali, which is a comprehensive soul.
Yeah.
Mashiach, for example, he is connected to all souls,
Yeah.
just like Adam Harishon. So he doesn't have just a certain soul cluster, souls that he's connected to, soul root. Um, he does, but at the same time, he's connected to all souls, just as Adam, and we know of Moses to be the same. That's
Yeah.
why they always say there's a Moses in every generation. I mean, even the Messiah is Moses.
Yeah.
So just to give people a direction of what's going on here with all this soul stuff.
Yeah, and this is where it gets incredibly technical. And to be honest, when I read through that, it'll take me a while to understand the complexity if I ever do, with Hashem's help with
It's
the
difficult.
Shar HaGilgalim, because he gets into the Arizal gets into the very technical um, components of that. And of course, but just for those who are curious, it's his disciple who wrote the material because Arizal never actually
Playing the top.
wrote. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
but anyway, I just figured I'd put the little asterisk out there. So yeah, very good. And just very quickly to touch on that. So an Ibur is when a righteous person, usually who passed, is in a soul entanglement. It's conditional. We'll talk about that. If you live a certain way, if you live a proper and righteous life, and you genuinely are trying to do the best you can, that soul will stay with you, right? The opposite is when you kind of put yourself in a different state. You're in a state of impurity. All those empty slots, again, they can now be taken over by something like a Ruach Ra or Dibuk, right? And those who are
The
familiar with
Debo
the,
can take over you completely, correct? Because you have put
the
yourself out there. That's what I've read.
if you continue to go down that path, yeah, and they still have exorcisms in Jerusalem too. But and of course, those who are familiar with the New Testament, that's what's going on. These people had reached a level where only a tzaddik could remove a dibuk or
Yeah,
these spirits. Now I know the language at that time gets a little imprecise, but that's what's happening. You have this, your soul can be entangled with these entities for better or for worse, depending on your state. That's why purity is important, righteousness, sanctification, like these disciplines are important because this is how you determine which way it's going to go. And I just want to keep that in mind as I read this next passage, because you choose which type of soul entanglement you're going to engage in, right? The righteous one, which is connected to the creator through the help of this intermediary, or the negative one, which is going to like run amok with your Yetzer Hara. Here's what First John says, 1 John 3:8-10. He lays this out. Whoever makes a practice of sinning is of the devil, for the devil has been sinning from the beginning. The reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the works of the devil. Listen to this. No one born of God makes a practice of sinning, for God's seed abides in him. There's
wow,
that language
wow,
of Ibur.
wow,
And he cannot keep on sinning because he's been born of God. So he's saying,
wow.
if you have the Ibur that's connecting you to Hashem, then you wouldn't be sinning. But he says, and he cannot keep on sinning. It's impossible, because if you have the Ibur, you wouldn't be sinning. If you don't
Exactly.
have the Ibur, you lost it. And then he goes on and says, and the children of the devil are revealed. By this, the children of the devil are revealed. So again, in the New Testament, we're seeing that laid out here. The multi-directional, choose your own destiny entanglement of the soul.
Right. That's deep. And then the Talmud rabbis explained that one sin leads to another, and one mitzvah can lead to another. And they also teach that a person doesn't sin unless an impure spirit comes upon him. It's talked about a
Yeah.
ruach ra, an impure spirit, and kind of sort of like clouds the mind. And when you begin to sin, you kind of like break a barrier. And if you continue to do it, it almost becomes acceptable to you, where it becomes very easy. And so it becomes very hard to build that barrier back up, because you have opened up the floodgates. So I mean, it's very important. You cannot get an Ibur of a righteous tzaddik. I mean, living a life contrary to Torah or contrary to the will of God. It doesn't happen like that. I mean, actually, you're doing the opposite. You're putting yourself susceptible to impure spirits, that can be guiding you in some unconscious way, sometimes even consciously.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And um, we just, when you think about the way the Ibor works in negative and the positive, we're not taught if you're outside the Jewish community, if you weren't raised in a community that's kind of diving into this, you're not really taught to protect yourself either. You're not
Mm-mm.
aware of the potential in the positive, but you're also not aware of the potential in the negative. Um, and I think that's where a lot of people are today. They've been sort of cut off, if you will, spiritually. And we said that one of our earlier episodes, the more you continue to sin, you collapse, right? I think it's Talmud Sota, the person only sins because of a spirit of folly. And
Yes,
it's
that's it.
dangerous
Yeah,
because if it's not remedied, you'll continue to collapse into that space where you just won't know right from wrong anymore. And
yeah.
that's a dangerous place to be. And I honestly
Paul
think,
Paul talks about that a lot when it has to do with the non-Jew. And this is the reason why there's a lot of people think it's they don't know any better. This is the reason why there's this big thing about Israel being separate. That's what kedusha means, separate. Because the outside nations have been disconnected from God. And the whole process of tikkun olam is to make it so that the whole world is filled with the knowledge of God. But
yeah,
in order to be able to fight the other side, the Sitra which is literally where the nations are at, Israel needs to stay holy, Kedusha,
yeah,
because they're the carriers, they're the chariots of the Shekhinah, they're the
yeah,
carriers of God,
yeah,
right? And they're spreading the light of God to the world. This is part of the reason, though, even though Israel sins in God's unfathomable wisdom and divine providence, even though they sin and he punishes them with exile, whatever, even there they do his will because it is taught that Golos, exile, was the Jews only went into exile in order to sift sparks and to gather up and spread the light of God to all the nations, make converts is taught like that in the Gemara, to make
yeah.
converts. They went into the exile, into the nations so they could bring righteous souls under the wings of the Shekhinah.
Yeah, Abraham and Sarah made souls, it says in the literal sense, um, in the Torah. And it's interesting because we take for granted though that the Ibur through the patriarchs is all of Israel's tie back to this, right? God's
Definitely.
punishment is disciplinary for the sake of correction. It's for the sake of um, helping to make better in the end. And the way I see it, and we'll have some more verses in here to talk about, I'm sure, but the way I see it, the Ibor in the New Testament is unique because it seems as if Yeshua is the Ibor for the nations. That's what it seems
Yes.
like the New Testament is really zeroing in on. It's this
They've
idea
never
that
the nations have never had anyone to connect to in that sense.
right, and that's where it's a new it's a novel revelation. And when you look at the kind of the writings of the Vilna Gaon, for instance, and anyone who comes in the spirit or the aspect of Mashiach ben Yosef, you see that that's what their job is. Their job is to purify the nation, sanctify the name of God, turn people away from idolatry. That's the tribe of Joseph's sons. It all goes back to the Torah. His mother
Yep.
sat on the idol to hide it from Laban, and the sages say those who come from those tribes are going to have problems with idolatry. So Messiah Ben Yosef is connected to the idea of ridding the world of idolatry. And what's happening
Incredible.
on a physical level, but it's also happening on a spiritual level. And in 1 John 4, we read again in this language, by this we know that we abide in him and he in us, because he has given us of his spirit. And
Wow.
these are
Wow.
right. And these are like everyday, like anybody could quote that, right? Like you go to a church and most
And
people
have
will
no
quote that.
idea.
Right. But like, and they won't have the fundamentals around exactly what's going on and how that's possible or what that even really means, because
What it
there's
means,
just
yeah.
that tradition has been cut off. So yeah, there's just so much to it.
Rebbe Yeshua also in John 17:23, he says like this. He says, there's a lot that he says in these passages, but he says, I and them and you and me. Okay. So he says that Yeshua, is in them. How? How is he in them? And you and me, that they may become perfectly one, so that the world may know that you sent me and loved them even as you loved me. And again, it goes back to what you were saying. The nations haven't had that lifeboat before Yeshua. They not at this level, at the very least. Something that they could, and you could see. I mean, I believe it was Rabbi Moshe David Vaye in one of his works that I think is half Italian, half Hebrew. They quoted the passage that says, I think it's Zechariah, where it says that 10 men from the nations will come and grab on hold to the tzitzit of a Jew,
Yeah.
and they'll say, "We will go with you because we know that God is with you." And Rabbi Moshe David Vaye interprets that passage beautifully. He says that these are the nations grabbing onto the tzitzit of Yeshu HaNotzri.
Yep.
He interprets it like that. It's incredible.
It is amazing. It's funny. Here we are. Like I think I told you, I texted you earlier. I was at the gas station today, and I heard some people who, to me, they didn't seem, by the way that they were kind of talking about the concepts and just from visual appearance, they didn't seem to me to be Jewish or involved in a synagogue, but they were just debating the Ten Commandments versus the 613, and it was
Incredible.
interesting to
Incredible.
overhear. And I texted you because it's one of those, you can see the work is happening behind the scenes in a very clandestine way, besod, right, in secret. And that's honestly what I think the tradition has said about Mashiach ben Yosef. There will be this rectifying spirit that kind of goes across the world, just like Joseph was saving the nations. He was bringing people in from the nations. Mashiach ben Yosef, the spirit, the movement, all the aspects of it will continue to move in this way. And I really think it's through the dimension of the Ibur that this is happening. And there's something I wanted to touch on too. Sanhedrin 47a says the righteous are greater in death than during their lifetime.
Wow.
And,
Yeah.
and
I
I've
see where
written
you're
about
going. Yeah.
this. Yeah, I've written about this on the website. There's a reason for that. And we've done a video on this. It's when you look at the way the cosmology that Judaism ascribes to, the worlds, the upper worlds, right? A person who passes away, as the Arizal said, if he completely rectifies his spirit, a righteous person will come, as mentioned, and it'll bring down a higher level of spirit, and it'll be able to help more people because that person is now outside of time and space. We're talking,
Yep.
everything's amplified, and
Yep.
it's fascinating to me because, again, you continue to see that language in the New Testament with the assumption that we've understood this, that we know what the sages are talking about, that the person's greater in death than in life. Like,
Hmm.
what else would that mean, right? They assume we understand that.
Yeah, like we were talking about earlier, we said that there's two ways an impregnation can happen. It can happen when it can happen while the person is actually alive, but to a lesser, he has a lesser radius of what he could attach. The radius that he could attach while he is alive is those that are connected to him. Okay,
Right.
but once this is the reason why in the Gemara it said that a tzaddik is greater in death than he is while he was alive. Because once he goes into the higher worlds, his neshama, his soul can touch so much more.
Yeah.
I believe it's through the seichel, through his teachings, through his knowledge of
Yeah.
and what the way that God has been able to use him. It's all through, of course, hashgacha pratis, divine providence. But that it's just simply amazing just to think about that stuff.
There's a point in there I want to come back to, but listen to this verse after you just said that. So this is Colossians 3:11. Here there is neither Greek nor Jew, circumcised, uncircumcised, barbarian,
Wow.
Scythian, slave or
Wow.
free, but Messiah is all and in all. In
That's
all.
incredible, man. That's crazy. Like me, I've heard these verses over and over and over again throughout my life, and it's just crazy to hear them in the new light and such in that way. It's just unbelievable.
I
Um,
have so many of them. And when you
mm,
understand it, now most people take that Colossians passage completely out of context and they think that there's no need for Jew or Gentile, right? Like they look at it from a physical level, the earthly level. We should be a third new person that's neither Jew nor Gentile, right? Like, and don't get me started on that. But they're not understanding that this is a spiritual level context, and it's talking about Ibur. And it says it in plain text. Messiah is all and in all.
In oh my gosh. And that's it. You have to understand why that is so. And we've talked about this in the
Yeah.
past. I just stated a little bit earlier. It's because the soul of Mashiach is from the highest worlds. It's
Yep.
from the highest world, and it is from the level of Keter, Sifrot. We're talking about the Sifrot,
Yep.
and he is from the level of Keter. Okay, and it's we don't even know what we're talking about when we're talking about this level. And just like when we're talking about the level of the Yechida, we talk about this stuff. It's called oneness. It's united, completely connected to the one, to the Creator, in such a sense. Hence, why Yeshua could say, "The Father and I are one." I mean,
Yeah.
he has this language over and over and over again because he shares at that highest soul level root. It is taught in the Ramchal. He teaches that at the very beginning, when Adam Harishon went to commit the sin, the first sin, that he he was connected or tapped into the soul level of Chaya, some level or some way.
Yeah.
But some say that both soul levels flew away. Some say that just the level of the Yechida, the moment he went to partake of the sin, it flew away and it did not participate
Yep.
in the first sin. It is
That's right.
uncontaminated. So the person who's on such a level, which the Kabbalists and most explain that the person who will reach this level on such a complete level, that's why the Midrashim say the Mashiach is higher than he's higher than the mountains, and they say this means that he's greater than the patriarchs, he's greater
Yeah.
than Moses, and they say he's even greater than the Malachim, the ministering angels. I mean, this is incredible. This is crazy stuff. And
Yeah.
so you hear the language in the New Testament, and it's all there. It's all there.
It's there.
When the one of the most famous passages, I've said this before, John 3:16, and in other places it says it. It uses a very specific language that's connected to the Yechida. It says, "For God so loved the world, Hashem so loved the world that he gave his only begotten." That word only begotten is
Yeah.
also used with Yitzhak Avinu,
Yep.
the father, the patriarch Isaac. And when it is used, some of the commentators say is that only begotten is connected to the Yechida,
Yeah.
that unique son,
Adam Cadman.
because Abraham already had a son, uh, uh, Ishmael, but
Yeah.
he still calls him. Hashem says, "You're only one." He says, "You're only one." The Yechida.
And this is where, I mean, you could just bury yourself in these concepts. I'm trying to put myself into the mind of the person who just didn't watch the first three and they're just listening to this one. I don't know any other way to make it simple because it's not simple at this point. We've waded
No,
in.
it's not.
This is like walking into the end of a semester of like trigonometry and trying to catch up. So I have some more
Rabbi
verses.
Rabbi Trugman, real quick. Rabbi Trugman says this. He says the Arizal explains that a soul may enter the body of another for a limited time for two reasons: in order to fix itself by participating in the positive actions
Yep.
of the whole soul, or alternatively, in order to assist the whole soul accomplish what it cannot do on its own.
Yep.
And that type of language is in the New Testament. Then it says, in both cases, the person who is impregnated with a soul is totally unconscious of this reality, although he may feel it on some level as an increase in his strength, inspiration, or motivation. The Arizal understands the well-known Talmudic axiom in Shabbat 104a that if one desires to purify himself, they assist him from above, referring to the Ibur,
Yeah.
where the impregnated soul becomes the manner in which help is sent from above, from on high. Whatever the reason for Ibur, it is deemed a great chesed, kindness from God, as it helps one in need and allows a departed soul the chance to elevate itself without having to reincarnate for an entire lifetime.
Yeah.
Through Ibor, the impregnated soul only stands to gain and not to lose. The Arizal explains that the impregnated soul does not share in the pain or the sins of the whole soul.
Yeah.
Indeed, if the whole soul consistently sins, the Ibor will leave.
And that's a scary thing, right? If you don't, if you intentionally did it, or if you don't know the dynamics of purity, and right, you could sever that connection. And something else, I don't know if he said it, I'm sure he does later in your book. The souls of the righteous are in Gan Eden, right? Right,
Hmm.
that's where they are. Um, Also called paradise, by the way. It's also known as paradise in the language. The Arizal says that the righteous person, I'll read it, the ruach of a person to be in Ibur, it can even be from the earlier righteous, the patriarchs, or the righteous souls, or somebody who's in Gan Eden. And the person who is gifted the Ibur, let's say they do a good job. Let's say you manage to stay pure, and you really you dive into this soul work and you develop yourself. You earn the same level of Gan Eden that the Ibur is sitting in,
Wow.
although you
Wow.
wouldn't have reached that level without it.
House
And
without it.
and what does Yeshua say to one of the criminals now, crucified criminal? Tonight you'll dine with me in, right, paradise.
In paradise.
Because it's I don't think it's so much like someone sitting there with a microphone recording the conversation. I think it's showing that there is this dynamic of Ibor, like it's explaining this tradition,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
writing it into. A couple more passages, and I do want to touch on one more thing before we close this up. But in Galatians
Yeah.
2:20, he says, "I've been crucified with Christ, and it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me."
That's incredible, dude.
And then in Romans, now again, we're talking to, these are Gentile audiences, Romans 8:11.
Yeah.
If the spirit of the one who raised Jesus from the dead lives in you, the one who raised him from the dead will also make your mortal bodies alive through his spirit who lives in you. It's the same language. It's
It's the
just
same language,
it's
word for
just
word,
assumed.
man.
And if you come at these passages, by now there are traditions behind them, but they just don't hold up when you understand that there is a pre-existent framework from which these are being pulled from.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's more. I encourage everyone to go into it. And when if you're reading that text, I'm not saying go ahead and read it. Just saying if you are, keep an eye out for that, because you'll start to see this in there, and it'll radically change the passage. So on a lower level, I've heard this taught that the music we listen to, the books
Yep.
that we
Yep.
read, and this can be a good thing if you're reading the works of a particular rabbi or a particular sage or whatever, or a spiritual leader, um, that's creating some kind of a degree of Ibor with them. So think about that. That's why you're studying the Torah, which is a divine name. All the letters combined make a divine name. It's the word of Hashem. There's an Ibor. There's some spiritual transaction. You're not just reading text, right?
I need to clean up my gym music, man.
I think we all do. Uh, but so why do you listen to certain music at the gym? What happens in you?
It cranks you up in a certain way that you're not cranked up all the time.
It's
Yeah, and that's
it
and the rabbis explain, just like death is, I think it's 1/4 or something, I forgot, of death. Sleep, sleep is, I forgot what the
1/60th.
ratio is, 1/60th of death. So they say that music has is so spiritual. Music is like there's like different levels of nevuah, of prophecy and ruach
Mhm.
hakodesh, and I think music is there. It's one of the levels. I was like, yo, and that's the reason why someone can play a beautiful symphony, can make you cry, or it puts you in different moods. Music can do that. How
Yeah,
does it do that? There's a spirituality to music. Hence why the rabbis, they sing the Torah. They sing the Torah. You know.
yeah.
So these things are incredible, incredible.
Yeah, but so think about that. I think that's maybe a good thing to end on, at least from my perspective. I think the media, the media we consume, the music we listen to, all these things have
Yeah.
a charge to them. And if you, I mean, maybe one or two is not going to derail you too much, but over the course of your day, what you're experiencing, listening to, watching on TV, all of this does have an impact. And if you're considering putting yourself in a state for that positive level, that elevation, um, this may not be the most useful towards that goal. But just understanding that everything has a spiritual transaction to it. And this tradition is very ancient. There's a lot you can read about it. Again, a lot of the notes we're pulling are from the book called Sha'ar, Hagil Gates
Yep.
of Reincarnation. You can find it on Amazon. There's a really, really well done recent translation of it with some footnotes. I think it's like $100. It's worth it though, I think. What do
Yeah.
you think? What other components here did we miss? Did we cover it all?
I think we covered it pretty well, man. As a like a over the top type of thing, we went in some depth, and I think we covered all bases. There's so much, like you said, there's so much more that we can do and share. So many sources, and we could be here. I mean, the New Testament seems to me. I mean, when I first ran into this concept, it seems to be filled with this concept of the evil. It's incredible.
It is, and let me tell you one last thing. I lied. I have one more. If you do a mitzvah in the particular style with the same intention that the rabbi who you learned
Wow.
it from did that, that's a very quick way to create an Ibur with that person.
Mm, mm.
The Breslov does this. The way they give charity, there's a way that Rabbi Nachman gave charity and carried out certain mitzvot, that they do the same thing, and they recognize that there's an Ibur when they do that. And Rabbi Nachman gets credit and they get credit, right? It's a beautiful thing. So look at this. John 14, 15 to 17. This is the Gospel of John. If you love me, you'll obey my commandments. Then I will ask the Father, and he will give you an advocate, a helper, to be with you forever. The Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot accept because it does not see him or know him. But you know him because he resides with you and will be in you. Right there.
It's incredible. That's so beautiful, man. That's definitely very inspirational and encouraging for us and
Yeah.
for all people who are somewhat connected to Yeshua, connected to God, uh, both Jew and Gentile. It's just beautiful stuff. Things that need to be shared. And like we always talk about, James, even when we go through our studies or behind the scenes and we share sources, I'm always learning. I'm always like, I mean, I just read that. I didn't read it like that. I
Yeah.
mean, it's incredible, incredible stuff.
Yeah, man, it is. It's good. It's an honor to break into these concepts with you and kind of pass notes around.
So
So
such a blessing, such a blessing. We live in very special times, and we were just talking about this, James. We live in times that, I mean, if you just went back 100 years ago, some of the things that are out today were not around,
no.
or at least not public in such a way. Just 100 years ago, it was not public. But nowadays, things have caught such a speed where,
Yep.
I mean, I cannot even keep up with it. There's so many things, so many sources that are being shared, so many different concepts that maybe I have studied by myself. And I had to struggle so much to try to find it. And
Yeah.
now they're just public everywhere. I'll go somewhere online. I'll be like, really? I mean, it took me for, and now everybody's sharing it. And it's incredible times because we're getting closer to the time that Messianic era. We're getting closer to those times.
Yeah, and I think that's why this is important. These are important topics because we can really dive in and do that work while we have that time.
With this time.
Well, good. So we did it. We finished our Soul series. We can consider what the next one will be. For anyone who has stuck with us through these, leave a comment below. Shoot us a message if you have some ideas or some clarifications. Let us know. Leave it in the comments, and we'll get back to you.
Peace, guys.